The Poppy War by R.F Kuang is a sort of Chinese historical fantasy surrounded a character called Rin, who is basically trying to get herself out of the depths of poverty and turn herself into some kind of soldier or someone of worth as she sees it. Now, this is by far my favourite fantasy book that I've discovered this year. It is super engaging. I was hooked from first page to the last page, and there is so much about this book that I want to talk about. The first thing I want to discuss in terms of this book is the pacing. Now, in a previous review I did for Prior to the Orange Tree, one of my biggest complaints with that book was just the pacing in general was just too slow, but too over the place, too slow in the start and too quick in the end. This book strikes a perfect balance in that. Honestly, it reads very easily, especially in the first third of the book, I would say, in which Kuang sort of takes on this magical academia sort of storyline in which Rin goes and attends a military academy, essentially, and learns to become a soldier. And in doing that, she's going to all these different classes that specialize in these different areas of war. And it's a very engaging and very interesting way of building the characters and building up the world. So we learn a bit more about, the inner politics and how the culture sort of integrates into the story. And there is a big contrast between the first third of this book and the second third. Essentially what happens is Rin is attending this military academy for a few years, and she's basically learning how to play at war. But then in the second third of the book, essentially an actual war breaks out, and suddenly none of this is theoretical. It is all being put into practice. And that contrast between, the almost Harry Potter-esque, we're fun, we're at school, we're learning all these things, it's so cool, magical, whatever, compared to just completely brutal, uncensored war that Kuang describes in very vivid detail, particularly in terms of what the antagonist group do within this war. And she challenges the reader with a lot of very intense questions surrounding the efficacy of war and how far you would be willing to go in pursuit of your victory, of your freedom, and how much your pursuit of those things is justification enough to perform acts of complete brutality and horror. And when we get to that point in the book, honestly, it feels like a slap in the face. Like your head is spinning from how quick you go from these kids just being innocent students at this academy with not a lot of life experience to being thrown right into a proper, real, brutal war. And when I say brutal, I mean these warring countries do not believe in the Geneva Conventions. They are not a thing in this world. That can be intense for some readers because Kuang does not shy away from describing basically these real terrible acts of war and war crimes. We're experiencing all this through the lens of Rin, who is our main point of view character. How can I describe Rin? You won't like Rin as a person, but you will be very engaged with her character. She is not someone to, almost root for. Even though she is our main character, we're seeing the side of the war from her side and her perspective, but some of her actions throughout this book are extreme. And I'm talking like as extreme as you can get in terms of war crimes, let's say. And exploring her justification, her rationale for that is extremely interesting as a reader. However, as a person in myself, there are just some things that she does within this book that are just completely unforgivable and unredeemable. And Kuang, I believe, does this intentionally. She is potentially challenging our viewpoint on the world and how we would view war in her place. Um, and it gives a lot of really good material for the other characters within the book to bounce off. I'd say the probably second most important character in this particular book is Alton, who is basically this prodigal genius of fighting and war and all this, just the art of battle, essentially. And Rim deifies Alton. She has a sort of romantic interest in him, and I think that really blinds her to a lot of his behaviors. And honestly, as the reader, you're also sort of blinded as well. You kind of deify him in a way, justifying his actions, not questioning him when you probably should be. And it's, for me personally, it was only whenever they had a particular altercation between Rin and Alton that I sort of realized, I was like, Pooh, right, okay, no, this is not a good guy. He is not stable. There's something wrong with him. And that's very interesting for Rin's character because she looks up very strongly to this guy who's like insane. So he's extreme in his methods and his ideas, and he doesn't seem to be making rational decisions. And that's interesting because honestly, Rin doesn't make rational decisions either. There is a lot of emphasis put on Rin being super, super intelligent in the start of the book. Like, she passes a very difficult exam at the number one position within her province. Like, Rin is not stupid. However, she's the perfect example of academic intelligence not translating to, honestly, real world situations. Rin can strategize in a fake scenario placed in front of her in a book, but when she's put into the real life situation, she constantly makes bad decisions. And a lot of that is down to Alton's influence as well, because she is trying to, copy him in a way, but she shouldn't be copying him because he's a complete disaster and he's extremely violent, short-tempered, and he doesn't care about any kind of consequences or what's the word I'm looking for? Casualties. Innocent casualties. He doesn't care. And that's very interesting. And there are other characters as well which are very engaging. I particularly like Jong, which is Rin's mentor. I feel like he's very interesting, kind of quirky, kind of fun, and I've actually gone ahead and read the second book and I'm on the third now, so I'm aware that there's a lot more to his character coming up, which is hinted at the first book and explored later on. But I really enjoy his character and I enjoy Kitai. I like the friendship that Rin develops with him. And I also like Nija. I think he's an interesting character. I kind of like their kind of rivalry that they have going on. And I like that it is explored a bit further on as well within the story, and they kind of try to mend bridges in a sense. But one of the big things about this book is that it's very, very thought-provoking. You'll be thinking about stuff you never really considered before. Stuff in terms of like sort of colonial influences, the effect that has on the cultures that are being colonized. Kuang raises a lot of very, very interesting questions within this book, especially in relation to the real world events in Chinese history, particularly in the way that the British sort of introduced opium as like a control method for the populace in China. A lot of really interesting real world events influence this story. And if you're a big fan of Chinese history, which I would say I am, you'll get good enjoyment out of this book. There's a lot of real world events that are hinted to, particularly at the end of the book, and in terms of the Longbow Island, which is essentially a stand-in for Japan, and the crimes that were committed during World War II and during the Japanese occupation are delved into by Kuang here. Anyway, this is a great book. My favourite fantasy of the year. I 100% recommend it, and I would give it 5 stars. Amazing read. Definitely pick it up. I can't wait to review the second book.